My name is Chuck. I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley in 2016. My college experience was perfect. I was part of a frat, I managed my studies well, and spent just the right amount of time chasing girls. I'm actually still friends with a lot of my old frat brothers, and I recently got engaged to my fiancée Rosie, whom I also met at Berkeley. If you had asked me my opinion of Berkeley when I was a freshman though, I can assure you that my answer would be very, very different. What I'm about to tell you is one of the main reasons why. I was never overly ambitious in high school. The Berkeley atmosphere was extremely foreign to me, and it was weird being surrounded by so many self-proclaimed high achievers. As a freshman, I was quickly swept up into the frenzy of career development and planning the next 30 years of your life as an 18-year-old. Silly, I know, but that was the nature of my school at the time. If you wanted to get any sort of offer in the business world, having a strong LinkedIn profile was a necessity. I can still remember the stress of cultivating a professional image online, as if my future hinged on which people I connected with and what skills I listed. Regardless, I checked all the boxes and began my search for a summer internship. It wasn't long before my inbox chimed with an actual meaningful message. To my genuine surprise, a prestigious business firm had reached out to me, expressing interest in my profile. It wasn't one of those bot messages either. The substance of the message indicated that this was actually a unique message designed specifically for me. I read it over like 6 times before finally responding, and after about a day and a brief correspondence, I was invited to a first-round interview. I spent hours researching the company so I'd know what to expect come the interview, and I prepped myself with all the sample questions I could find. I soon got a message from a guy named Armand Slowinski. I'll never forget that name for as long as I live. He stated that he was to be my interviewer, and naturally the first thing I did was do some background research on the guy. However, excitement soon gave way to puzzlement. I scoured LinkedIn for Armand's profile, expecting to glean some insight into the person I'd soon be meeting. Strangely, I found nothing. No trace of their professional footprint, no social media, nothing. I shrugged it off, attributing it to perhaps a preference for privacy or something like that. Armand and I agreed on a day and time, and he gave me the interview location. I searched it up on my phone and realized that it was some random coffee shop in Oakland. This is when I started getting confused. Why would an interview not take place in Berkeley? We had tons of coffee shops and perfect places for interviews in our college town, so I was just perplexed. The address online seemed pretty normal though, so I didn't think much of it. A day before the interview, I told my friend Riley about the situation. He was even more confused than I was, telling me that the situation seemed fishy. I agreed with him, but I figured it was worth it for the position I might be getting. He asked me how I was getting there, and I told him I was Ubering. He offered to give me a ride, as he wasn't doing anything at the time. I thanked him and took him up on his offer. Little did I know, I might not even be telling this story if he hadn't offered to drive me. It was 4 in the afternoon the next day, and Riley rolled up to my dorm. Admittedly, I was extremely nervous, and this was one of my first interviews. I got in the car, and we were off. 20 minutes later, I told Riley to drop me off on the street, as I didn't want to be seen having a friend drop me off for an interview. I thanked him, and he offered to wait for me. I asked him if he was sure, and he smirked, pulling out a big bag of weed from inside of his dashboard. I laughed, then shut the door. I walked the couple minutes to the location and froze in my tracks. I looked up at the literal construction site in front of me. There was no coffee shop. Even stranger, this entire area wasn't residential at all. Like, all of the buildings looked closed or private. Confused, I double-checked my phone and confirmed that I was in the right location. This entire block must have been recently demolished, so recently that even Google Maps hadn't updated. I pulled out my phone to call Riley, but before I could, a booming voice rang out behind me. "Chuck!" exclaimed a deep voice. I whipped around and was met with the appearance of an absurdly tall man wearing an expensive-looking black suit. Thank God, I thought, grateful that this whole ordeal hadn't been some kind of setup. His presence was commanding, yet oddly out of place amidst the derelict surroundings. I should also note that the car he was standing next to was a matte black Bentley. He walked toward me with a confused look on his face. We shook hands, and when I asked him about the construction site, he said he was just as surprised as I was. He furrowed his eyebrows and put his hand on his chin. "You know what, why don't we find someplace else? Get in," he said, motioning towards the Bentley. He walked back to the car and shouted over his shoulder, "Shotgun's all yours." Without another word, he got in the front seat and shut the door. Excitedly, I followed. I walked around the car just to admire it a little, and couldn't help but glance into the back seat. I expected to see the beautiful leather seats that you would expect in a Bentley, but instead, my eyes met a sight that sent a chill down my spine. Lying flat on the ground, obscured by the shadows, was a man. In his hand, he held something long and metal. Panic surged within me, my mind racing with the implications of what lay before me. This was a trap. I turned away from the car and ran as fast as I had ever run before. I heard the man yell my name from behind me, but I didn't even turn around to look. As I ran, I heard the one sound I was dreading, screeching tires. I shot a glance over my shoulder and saw the car turning around, pointing in my direction. I had to think quickly. There was no way I was going to outrun a car. It wasn't like I could just escape the situation. There wasn't really any open space around me, just an endless maze of streets. I could feel the terror coursing through my veins. I made it to the next intersection and faced a choice that may have decided my fate, left or right. Logic told me to just turn left as it was closer, but my feet chose for me before my brain could. I sprinted across the street to the right and darted down the road. I knew I didn't have long, 10, maybe 20 seconds at most. As if by some miracle, one of the buildings in front of me had a fire escape that looked just low enough to jump onto. With every ounce of my strength I had, I vaulted myself upwards, grabbing onto the ladder. I had never done a pull-up in my life, but in my mind, this was life or death. I made it up the ladder and kept climbing. The Bentley whipped around the corner and stopped on the street in front of the building. I couldn't see the driver, but I knew he was looking at me. There was nothing else I could do. If they chose to follow me, I'd just have to fight. The next minute felt like an eternity. The car stood there a little while longer and then accelerated down the street, turning left to never be seen again. I couldn't breathe. I pulled out my phone and called Riley, basically screaming into the phone about what happened. I stayed on the fire escape until he found me. I got in the car and we sped off in silence. The aftermath of this whole thing was pretty uneventful. I sort of blocked it out of my brain and refused to talk about it, even with Riley. As far as I was concerned, it never happened. But as much as I tried, there are times, like right now, when I can't help but recall every horrifying detail of what could have been the last day of my life.
I was working the night shift at my local Waldbaum's back when it used to be open 24 hours a day. There would normally be less than 10 customers throughout my shift, but I wouldn't get to sit around and do nothing though. They wanted me to work on stock when I wasn't helping a customer. It was a bigger Waldbaum's, so oftentimes there may have been one other person in the building, whether it be someone working on stock or someone cleaning. This night, I was the only one working. I was working stock in the cereal aisle when I heard something fall over on the other side of the shelf in the next aisle over. I would always hear the door to the store sliding open. It was the loudest thing ever, so it kinda caught me off guard that there might have been a customer in the building. Of course, it wasn't weird. Yet. Not until I looked to my left and saw a man standing by the edge of the aisle, shooting me a blank stare. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked him. No. Could you just point me to the eggs?" he said. He wasn't normal looking. His face looked weird. Not exactly ugly, just unusual. Like his upper lip kind of came out too far, almost like a Simpsons character. I was a bit uncomfortable that I had to deal with ringing him up. I hurried to finish the cereal aisle, and when I was done, I began to bring the U-boat cart to the back room. I was stopped halfway when the same guy cut me off through the middle section of the aisle. I want to note this guy was probably in his mid-30s, and at the time, I was only 22, though I looked much younger. The guy stopped me and started trying to make awkward small talk. He started by asking me my name, how old I was, if and where I went to school, and why I was doing the night shift. His questions started to get weirder when he asked me if I went to parties a lot and if I had a girlfriend. I told him I didn't, and then he asked me if I've ever had a boyfriend, while putting his hand on my shoulder. I immediately started walking away with the cart, but he followed me. I told him I wasn't into whatever he was thinking about. I went faster and faster until I finally made it to the back storage room. He didn't follow me in. I wasn't supposed to stay back there for extended periods of time to avoid customer theft. I decided it would be best to just wait for him by the register so that he would ring his stuff up and leave. But I waited there for at least 20 minutes. He never came. I decided he was gone, and whether he stole the eggs and something else, there wasn't anything I could do now. I had to go to the bathroom, so I took a quick jog to the back of the store and into the employee bathroom. Moments after sitting on the toilet, my heart dropped into my stomach as I heard the bathroom door open. I choked the urge to say something like, "You can't be in here," but I didn't want to give away my position. I lifted my leg so that I wouldn't be visible from under the stall, and what happened next was simply horrifying. I sat there for the longest time, looking at the floor, not moving a muscle. When I finally looked up, I could see an eye peering through the crack of the stall door. I screamed. I knew I was trapped. I knew I had one shot at making a move. I grabbed the box cutter in my pocket and began sliding it through the crack of the door, forcing him to move his eye away. I took that chance to slam the stall door open in his face and hightail it out of the bathroom and all the way out of the store. I called my boss at least 5 times before he finally picked up and explained everything. He told me to call the cops, and so I did. Of course, the man wasn't in the store anymore by the time the cops showed up. I only did the night shift twice after that, and luckily didn't see the man again.
It was a Tuesday night around 11 p.m. in 2013, and I was walking down a dimly lit street at night on my way home from work. My car had been in the shop, so I'd been forced to walk 3 miles home every day. The walk was barely an hour, so I was home before midnight. I live in a small town in southern Indiana, so after 10 there's rarely any cars on the road. The only vehicles you ever see are truckers heading to Indianapolis. I was about a mile into the walk when I turned on a dirt road. My house was off the beaten path, so I had to take all these dirt roads surrounded by forest to get there. As I was turning, I heard the sound of a motor in the distance, and it was getting closer very slowly. I saw about a quarter mile down the stretch of road I just turned off of a van moving very slowly without its lights. At first, this didn't strike me as out of place due to the fact that the town I live in there is a pretty cheap car dealership that sells used cars and vans with broken parts, like broken headlights. So I just assumed this guy was one of their clients. I kept walking down the side road with the van still going slowly down the main road. About 5 seconds later, I jumped when I heard the sound of the van roar, and it sped up really fast, except now it had its lights on. I was startled, but not worried. This was until the van got closer to the turn for the side road. About 500 feet away from the turn, the van turned off its lights again and slowed down. Now I was officially creeped out. I didn't want to seem startled, so I just walked faster down the road. I kept turning back constantly to see if I was being followed. Then my suspicions became reality as I saw the van turn onto the dirt road. I was only about 500 feet from the van, so I started to walk a lot faster. I didn't want to look back, but I did just to be safe, and what I saw frightened every bone in my body. I saw the van there, stopped with both the passenger and driver's doors open. At this point, I ran for my life down the dirt road. I heard what I'm positive was a gunshot not far away, and I really thought this was how I was going to die. I made a quick turn into one of the surrounding forests and hid behind a big rock. I heard what sounded like a middle-aged man not far away say, "I think she went into the woods." And then, to my horror, what sounded like 3 young girls, with one of them responding, "Okay sir, I'll see if we can find her." Now I wasn't fearing for my life. I was worrying I was going to be forced into whatever sick group this was. I was covering my mouth, trying not to make any sound, when I heard the man say, "Whoever finds her doesn't have to drink the blood tonight." A million thoughts ran through my head. Is this some sort of satanic cult? Are these girls kidnapped? Will I become one of them? I spent what felt like an eternity sitting behind a rock being scared of any sound that I could hear. Then to my relief, I heard cop sirens nearby. I stayed there just to be safe. When I felt the courage to look from behind the rock, I saw red and blue lights right outside the forest. I ran out screaming for help, and the cops came to me and said, "Ma'am, do you know about this body?" I was confused and said, "What body?" Then I saw in front of the cop car the most gruesome thing I will ever see. It was what looked like a naked young woman, gutted, blood everywhere. There was no van in sight. I then explained everything to the cops. The car, the man, the girls who had to drink the blood. The cops said they'd look into it and were nice enough to drive me home. That night, when I couldn't sleep, I looked out my window to see the van, the same one from before, driving slowly without its lights on down my street. This time I was smart and wrote down the license plate. I called the cops immediately and told them what I saw and gave the license plate number. As expected, when the cops came, the van was long gone, but what they told me is what will horrify me to this day. The cops said we checked the license plate number. It's a plate registered in South Dakota. But the thing is, we checked with other precincts around the country, and they've gotten reports tonight that there was also a suspicious van with that license plate. One in Vermont, one in Nevada, one in Alaska, and one in Texas. They said we'll call you if we get any more information. The cops left, and I never got a call. I don't really believe in the paranormal, so my best guess is that it was some sort of cult that used fake license plates to do their sick things all across the country, but I guess I'll never know. I moved out of Indiana, and now I make sure when I see something suspicious, I bolt.